Who's got it better than us? All right. I always wanted to try that. So, should Coach Harbaugh be fired? Should he be given more time? And what happens if you do fire him? What happens if he goes away to the NFL? That's the subject of this video. Welcome back to my channel. My name is Dr. Anwar Youssef Dunbar, and I am back for yet another Michigan football video. What's unique about this video is it's not going to be about one of the game predictions, so it's not going to be predicting the score for a game, nor is it going to be the recap of a game. It's going to address the topic of Jim Harbaugh's future, whether or not he should be fired, and whether or not he should be given some more time. So first of all, please like the video, please share it, and please subscribe to my channel. So it's year 5 of the Jim Harbaugh era, and my friend, I'll call him Abdul Gaines. Abdul Gaines is a Michigan fan just like me, and he wants to see the program do well, but I think that he's in that batch of fans that really expected to see the program, really get to that level of Ohio and Alabama and Clemson by this point. So he's in that batch of fans that's really, really rabid and disappointed at this point. He's part of that group that's been calling for Coach Harbaugh's head. Oh, by the way, yes, this is my Jim Harbaugh bobblehead. Here, take a look. That's my my little Jimmy bobblehead. I got this a couple of years ago. I've been going up for a game since Coach Harbaugh came back, about once a year. I think last year I saw them play twice. Once at the Big House for homecoming, and then I'd never been to Spartan Stadium, so I went up to Spartan Stadium to see them win the Paul Bunyan Trophy back from those evil green men up at Michigan State. So part of the fan base is calling for Jim's head, and they want him out of there for someone else. So I wanted to just make a video just talking about that and the ins and outs of that and what it will, the pluses and the minuses. So I hope to get in and out pretty quickly because it's been a long day. So here we go. So I'm going to start by saying that being the head coach at the University of Michigan is a challenging job, and it's been written about in books like this by John U. Bacon. It's been chronicled for years. John is the official historian of Michigan athletics, and more specifically Michigan football. So he is he's the official historian of Michigan football. He spent a lot of time with Bo Schembechler, Lloyd Carr, and around the team over the years. He's from Ann Arbor, and he went to the university, and I enjoyed the Sunday morning show with him and Jamie Morris, which they no longer have. Anyway, but John has documented that it's a difficult job in terms of wanting to do things the right way and having academic standards and only being able to bring in a certain kind of kid. So the Michigan head coach has to understand the culture of the program, the history of the program and the school, and it's really important to try to win the right way. And so they can only bring in certain kinds of kids who can do the work, kids who are going to listen, kids who are not going to cheat. And there's this Michigan way that the coaches have to adhere to. And, so it's kind of on par with Notre Dame and Stanford. That's kind of how I like to think of it. And they can only bring in certain kinds of kids at Notre Dame, and definitely at Stanford, which has a strong academic reputation like Michigan. They can only bring in certain kind of kids there. So you need kids who can play, and you need kids who can do the schoolwork. So that's those are two things that make the job challenging. By the way, this book by John U. Bacon is called Overtime, Jim Harbaugh and the Michigan Wolverines at the Crossroads of College Football. And John could not have timed publishing this book even better. Anyway, so the other challenge of being the Michigan head coach is that some of our fans are very, very impatient, and they have very high expectations, which is kind of understandable based upon the history of the football program. You have a whole line of legendary coaches: Bo Schembechler, Fielding Yost, Bump Elliott, Benny Osterman. You have a whole line of coaches. You have a whole rich history of football at the school. The winged helmets, the stadium, the fight song, all of it. But the fans have very high expectations for the program, and there's a batch that gets very rabid and very angry when the team is not performing up to where they think it is, or when the team hasn't beaten Ohio as much as we would have liked it to, when the team hasn't gotten that signature win on the road. A lot of the fans get restless and they want the coach's head, boom, on a platter. And the whole signature win thing, that's something my friend Abdul Gaines talks about all the time. But speaking of which, in a text message, my friend Abdul Gaines, he sent a very good podcast with involving Colin Cowherd and Joel Klatt, talking about what the realistic expectations for the Michigan football program are, and whether or not Jim Harbaugh is doing a good job. And their discussion, if you're one of those rabid and unhappy fans, their discussion might surprise you. I'm going to leave that podcast in the description box below. But it's a difficult job. And so I thought back to when I was a graduate student. I got to the university in the fall of 1999. So Lloyd Carr was still the head coach. That was Tom Brady's last year. So I actually got to see Tom Brady play live once that year. He was playing against Drew Brees' Purdue team. So that was kind of cool. It was an ugly game, though. And Lloyd took over for Gary Moeller, I think in the mid-90s. And, of course, he led the team to the national title in 1997. That team had Charles Woodson, Brian Griese, I believe Ty Streets, Jarrett Irons. It was loaded, and things just fell right for the team that year. And they went undefeated and beat Ryan Leaf's Washington State team in the Rose Bowl. And what I remember about Coach Carr's tenure is that I don't think he was ever able to get back there. He came close a couple of years. They had a really, really good team, Tom Brady's last year. They didn't win the Big Ten, but they went to the Orange Bowl and they beat Alabama, and they beat Ohio that year. And that was a senior-laden team that was very, very good. You also had David Terrell and Marquise Walker and Anthony Thomas on that team. You had James Hall and Dhani Jones and a lot of holdovers or players who were on the championship team from 1997. So that was a really good team. And Coach Carr went through numerous quarterbacks under his watch. After Tom Brady, there was Drew Henson, and then there was John Navarre. And then his last quarterback was Chad Henne. And I remember really, as a graduate student, really becoming a football fan there. And every year, Lloyd had competitive recruiting classes, and he had really competitive teams. But it just seemed like every year there was something, even when his teams were at their peak, there was a loss that stopped us from getting into the BCS top two, or there was a broken play here, a broken play there, a bad call here, a bad call there, something that would get us two or more losses. That was another thing, is that for Lloyd, I always think about the environment changing and the ground shifting underneath him. So in 1999, they shifted from voting the champion in to the BCS. So if you weren't in that top two, you weren't going to play for the national title. And there were a lot of people who were happy with the system at first, but they were bitter about it afterwards. And that bitterness about the BCS and only two teams being chosen is what led us to our college football playoff that we have today, the 4-team playoff, which now people are clamoring to get expanded to 6 or 8 teams. Anyway, so Lloyd ran a good program. It was competitive, but he never got in the top two of the BCS. The closest he came was the 2006 game down at the Snake Pit, and we came close to winning that game, but we didn't pull it out. And that was the other thing. Speaking of Ohio and the Snake Pit, Jim Tressel owned Lloyd Carr. Lloyd won one of the games, and he kept losing to Jim Tressel much the same way that he kept beating John Cooper. And so many would argue that Lloyd Carr's dominance of John Cooper led to John Cooper being fired from Ohio State. Anyway, so I liked Lloyd. Lloyd was like a father and a grandfather, and Lloyd is a coach that I could have seen myself enjoying playing for. But the truth of the matter at the Michigan program is, if you're not excelling and if the fans don't think that you're winning the way you're supposed to be, eventually your head will be on the chopping block and people will be calling for you to be out of there. The Appalachian State loss didn't help, and there were just, over the years, there were all these grumblings about the offense is unimaginative, or should I say unimaginative, and it's 3 yards in a cloud of dust, and it's we're not we're mediocre, we're not getting good, we're not getting better. And so Lloyd decided to step down following the 2007-2008 season, I believe. And the fans got what they wanted. They got Rich Rodriguez from West Virginia. And Rich Rod's thing was, I run the spread. So it wasn't just that we got a new coach, but now you had a new coach who had to recruit and had to implement his spread offense. And I'm just going to be brief here. I never thought the spread was right for Michigan. Michigan, to me, was a tight end, a fullback, pounding the ball on the ground. And now we've got these 4 wide receivers and these quarterbacks running around, whether it was Tate Forcier or eventually Denard Robinson. Now we have this spread. And also the defenses weren't strong under Rich Rodriguez, and I think that caught up to him as well. And I think just, if you read, again, John U. Bacon wrote books about this, not this book, but other books, that Rich Rod was an outsider and he just didn't understand the culture at the University of Michigan. So after 4 years, Dave Brandon got hired as the athletic director, and they chopped his head. Next, you bring in another Michigan man, Brady Hoke. And Uh, Brady was able to win initially with a bunch of Rich Rod's players like Denard Robinson and Roundtree, Roy Roundtree, Jeremy Gallon, and Devin Gardner, and Fitzgerald Toussaint. He was able to win with them, and eventually Brady's coaching tenure settled into some kind of trough or level of mediocrity. He changed over his offensive coordinator from Al Borges to Doug Nussmeier. I think he kept Greg Madison as the D coordinator. The defense was decent. But under Brady, we got to a point where they wanted to run a pro-style offense, and the pass protection was an issue. So the quarterbacks were trying to stay in the pocket, and most of them, I'm thinking particularly of eventually Devin Gardner, they were back there literally running for their lives because they couldn't get pass protection, and they couldn't see down the field and let the routes develop, and it was a mess week after week, and it just looked odd because you had this Michigan offensive line playing teams like Connecticut, and our offensive line was getting pushed around and pushed around and pushed around, and it just wasn't Michigan. Brady Hoke was like that funny funny uncle with humor. You know, he jokingly called Ohio State Ohio. You know, when he first got hired, you know, he said, you know, for God's sakes, this is Michigan. You know that, and they played that drop on the radio numerous times. And what else? What else did he do? He always wore those shades on the sideline, and he never wore a headset. And when the team started losing, the fans were clamoring about he needs to put his headset on. He needs to put his headset on, and you know, why isn't he wearing a headset? And people were getting tired of him clapping for the team and then folding his arms, and they wanted him to put that headset on. And I remember there was a picture of him and Mark D'Antonio at the Big Ten Media Day eating some ribs or something like that, and it just looked funny. So he was a funny character. I think he loved the kids, he loved the program, and he wanted to create a clean program, which he did, but the team wasn't winning, and I think everyone just got tired of seeing our offensive line and our team getting pushed around. That wasn't Michigan. And he recruited well. Brady recruited really well, but there seemed to be a problem developing the talent. So eventually, Brady's head got put on the chopping block, and boom, he was gone. So it was around that time that Jimmy was with the San Francisco 49ers, and either he wore out his welcome there, or the team started losing, or both, and he came free. The 49ers released him. Can't remember if they released him or if he quit, but and then he magically came back home. It was like the return of the prodigal son, and he was supposed to be the savior of the program. So, and so it was he was highly celebrated. He played quarterback at Michigan. His dad coached at Michigan, and so it was a move that just made sense. He had coached in the NFL, had some success there. Coached at Stanford, coached at University of San Diego. He played quarterback in the NFL, so it just seemed to work. And it seemed like after that entire 8 years, spanning from Rich Rod's start to Brady Hoke's firing, we now had something that we could believe in, and we had a proven winner. So I think that Jim, in his time, he has made the program competitive again. The teams aren't getting, well, aside from the Wisconsin loss this year, the teams aren't getting shoved around the way they were under Rich Rod and Brady Hoke, but I think there's been a level of inconsistency at times, and I think that folks are disappointed because we haven't ascended to that level of Ohio. Again, that's from Brady Hoke. We haven't ascended to the level of Ohio or Clemson or Alabama, and people are really upset about that. But then the question is, what would it mean to start over from scratch again? And, you know, you never really know, but you're hitting the reset button. It's like starting a new relationship, you know. The new coach would have to come in, establish his culture, understand the Michigan culture, bring his staff, start recruiting his players. He'd have to start implementing his system. And so you'd be starting over. And I think that we're at a pretty decent place right now. So I think that Ward Manuel should let Jim stay a little while longer to see if he can in fact take us to that next level. I think Jim understands the culture here. And I think that someone like Rich Rodriguez didn't understand the culture. And if you bring in a coach who doesn't understand how rabid our fan base is, and how, if they don't understand the history and the love for the program and the school that the fan base has, it could make for an unhappy marriage like the one Rich Rodriguez had. But you need a coach and a staff that can develop the players the way that in a way that the Hoke staff was unable to do. So in a lot of ways, this is a bad fit for a lot of coaches, and a lot of coaches would not excel here. I think Jim should stay put. There have been a lot of coaches in football and even in basketball that were not highly successful right away, but they were given time, and once they were given that time, they ascended to that next level. In basketball, Coach K, Mike Krzyzewski at Duke, was not successful right away, and eventually he became Coach K. You know, he won those national titles. They were in the Final Four for numerous years, and he became Coach K. One of the things they've been talking about on the Michigan podcast, on the Michigan podcast with Steve Dace and on Colin Cowherd, is Dabo Swinney's name keeps coming up, and Clemson wasn't always Clemson. It took Dabo Swinney a little while to finally break through to become the program that we see today. So I think a little more time is in order. That's what I would do if I were Ward Manuel, and I hope that Jim hasn't become discouraged from folks wanting his head on the chopping block. And I think, you know, one other thing that my friend Abdul Gaines has pointed out is that Jim has not yet played one of his quarterbacks long term. So his first year, Jake Rudock transferred in. The next year, Wilton Spate, who was one of Brady Hoke's players, ascended into the starting lineup as our starting QB, and I thought he had a great year until he got hurt at the end, where we lost to Iowa, and then we lost in that controversial game to Ohio. And then Wilton got hurt the next year because of our young, porous offensive line. And then that year was a mix of John O'Corn and Brandon Peters. And then the next year, that's when Shea came in. But we haven't had nice stability at the quarterback position over a series of years. And it hasn't yet been one of Jim's guys that he's brought in as a freshman and grown up. The heir apparent next year, once Shea's gone, should either be Dylan McCaffrey or Joe Milton. And I don't think it's a good idea to bring in another graduate transfer. I think we need to take one of the guys that we have here. They're tall, they're athletic, they can throw, they can run. I think we need one of our guys that we have on the roster already. And then the question is, and I hate to bring this guy up, but, you know, he's controversial and it's fun. Is Jim really the quarterback whisperer? Colin Kaepernick rose quickly to stardom in San Francisco under Jim. And then over the 2 to 3 years after San Francisco went to the Super Bowl, Colin slid backwards. He slid downwards. So either Colin did not develop on his own, or Jim did not or Jim wasn't vigilant about developing Colin, or something happened, but Colin Kaepernick, after his meteoric rise, he did not turn into an NFL quarterback, which is, him having a job and him being frozen out of the league. That's a different topic, but when I think about Colin, I think about Jim as well, and the fact that Colin did not develop into a steady, reliable NFL quarterback, and Jim was his coach. So that's something to look out for the next batch of guys coming up, Dylan McCaffrey and Joe Milton. So I think I'm going to cut this there, or should I say I'm going to cut this video here. I think Jim should have some more time. I think that hitting the reset button right now would just set us back, even more. And I think it takes time. It takes time for players to learn how to win. It takes time for players to grow into a winning unit. Every school is different. Every program is different. And I think we all have to remember that these are student athletes. So these are 18, 19, 20, 21-year-olds. And in Michigan, they're expected to be students as well. They're expected to go to class. They're expected to legally earn their grades. And there's always the potential for them to make mistakes that young people make. So sometimes when I was a graduate student, I heard stories of some of the football players getting in fights as scorekeepers. Sometimes there are, unfortunately, domestic disputes between players and their girlfriends. Sometimes players do get DWIs. Sometimes they do things that kids do. And all these things impact what happens on the field. And I made a video earlier about the team missing Chris Evans this year. Someone said it was academic problems. One commenter recently said that he had a domestic dispute with a female. So anyway, these are all things to just keep in mind as you watch the team play and as you watch these young people play. It's not just as simple as throwing kids out there and throwing a ball out there and say, play. There's so much more that goes into it. In any case, I'm done. Word manual, give Jim more time. Jim, don't get discouraged. Players, don't get discouraged. Please like the video. Please share it. And please subscribe to my channel. Go Blue. And always remember that your attitude determines your altitude. Take care. And I'll talk to you the next time. Bye-bye. Jim says goodbye too. I also have a Bo Schembechler bobblehead as well, which is sitting in my cube at work. Anyhow, I'm out of here. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.